preliminary budget and any item or items therein contained.
Thank you. Can I have a roll call, please?
Board Member Bernstein?
Here.
Board Member Higley? Board Member Woolite?
Here.
Board Member Storms? Here. Supervisor Stanley?
Here. Okay. I was hoping our legislator would promise to be here tonight, but maybe he got caught up somewhere. We'll just announce there's not much change from the proposed budget from what we adopted as a preliminary budget, except two major issues which are helping to reduce the taxes in both the general fund and the Phoenician Water District. One is health insurance. We received final figures from our agent concerning the current CDPHP plan available for our employees. The rates were a considerable increase over what was initially anticipated, and as stated last month, those numbers showed a near 13% increase over this year's costs. At our request, the agent was able to find a similar high deductible plan for MVP. By changing back to MVP, the impact on the employee's costs are similar to what we had anticipated under the CDPHP plan, around 6%. The difference is that it carries a lower deductible, which saves the town general fund approximately $15,000, which we've reduced directly from the anticipated taxes for next year. This change drops the general tax rate by almost a full percentage point. It also further reduces our spending for a total reduction in spending of $35,000, or roughly 1.5%. Excuse me. Phoenicia Water. After more thorough information has become available, it appears that the pump in Phoenicia will be more expensive than anticipated. The engineer has given an estimate of $70,000 for the pump installation and all extraneous work that would have to be performed in order for the pump to be replaced. Alfred Peavy, the chair of the Phoenician Water District Committee, met with Candace Balmer of RCAP Solutions and I to look at the possibility of receiving the grant for this work. Recognizing the scope of work to be completed, I propose that we hold off on the pump for this coming year, change the anticipated loan repayment to a capital reserve line, and reduce the amount by $3,000, thus reducing the tax increase from 25% to 17% for the district. We also feel that we can reduce the overall cost of the project by parsing out certain similar or smaller jobs that would need to be completed to prepare for the pump's placement out of existing appropriations for the water district. Candace will be here next month to do a presentation on tasks needed for the application. For instance, we will have to send out income surveys to all Phoenician Water District users as required for the grant application. The grant application will be due in May or June of 2015, and we would know by September whether we will receive it. If we get it, the job can proceed without financially crippling the district. If we don't get the grant, we will have $7,500 for the project, plus an additional $7,500 the following year, giving the district $15,000 to offset the amount to be borrowed while still completing the smaller jobs. This ultimately will get the job completed and reduce the overall cost of payback, giving district users a quicker return on their investment. Recycling. We did receive good word this month as the Resource Recovery Agency has given notice that they are retracting their proposed fees for recyclables and that they are not requiring a long-term open-ended contract with the towns. Our recycling costs will not go up, but solid waste, whom we contract with Sobeys, will still be going up mid-July next year. I have not received word on the anticipated cost for Shandaken from Sobeys yet. I would not suggest reducing the anticipated increase in the budget. Overall, in general, with all the changes, the general budget spending is down 1.46%, meaning the proposed spending is near $35,000 less than this year. The $102,000 drop in non-taxable revenues is what creates a 4% increase on the general tax levy. Highway, the spending is up 3%, and the tax levy reflects the same, mostly due to contractual expenses and salt. Overall, the accountant assures me that we will not need to pass a resolution to exceed the tax cap. Again, understand that the tax cap calculations are complicated, but essentially if you don't use up your cap space from previous years, then it is retained as a reserve available cumulatively over a 3-year span. So because we had 0 last year and 1% the year before, we have enough reserve space in cap space. To better explain the cumulative tax increase, including special districts, is roughly 3.4%, which in turn translates to an increase of $34 in taxes if you paid $1,000 in town taxes last year, which of course is barring any change in your assessment. We have resolutions to adopt the preliminary budget as a final budget tonight. So, that being said, open up to the public for comment on the budget. Board members.
concerned that we have these increases. And I wonder if you could elaborate on any places that you thought you might be able to cut the budget so that we wouldn't have those tax increases. And of the ones you've considered, why you decided not to cut.
I can tell you that it's really the non-taxable revenues. That's what our biggest problem is the loss of non-taxable revenues. We're down $102,000 in non-taxable revenues. The biggest one being unexpended fund balance. Because again, as I've said in previous years, as we get closer to what we're actually expending, we have less to carry over for the following year. So it wasn't a case of there were things, you know, there were places to cut as best we could, minimally here and there, but everything is pretty much all in line with what our spending is and what we've been doing traditionally and even over the past couple of years. We did cut some of the things, like some of the salaries were reduced because we have new employees that have come in, so they're at a lower rate of expense. The healthcare, again, I can explain on highway, there's no reduction on the healthcare expense for highway because the highway deductible that the employees contribute to the deductible is far less than what we do in the general because of our contract. The general employees are contributing like $81,000 towards the healthcare plan on the general side, whereas on the highway side, they're only contributing $35,000.
But that's contractual.
And that's contractual based on the percentages. Again, we tried to change that in the contract, but they wouldn't get it, they wouldn't buy into it, so it was approved as such. Other than cutting essential services or cutting back on some of the things that we've contributed to over the years, there was nothing really to cut, and it's going to be minimal. It'll be $500 or $1,000 here or there. As you saw, we cut $15,000 out of the healthcare cost, and that had a nice impact. But there's nowhere we're going to find $10,000 or $15,000 more in this budget, which is not possible. Yes?
Yeah, as far as the pump goes, a friend of mine is over with Marty. I think you met him. He has a master's degree in engineering and has been all over the world. I brought him down with the engineer from the Groom or Malone.
Yeah, Malone.
Yeah, and Marty came down later and said to me, Rick, he's not going to tell you this, but why don't you just get a motor, they're GE motors. You should just get a new motor, which could run maybe $5,000 to $7,000. He said, have the fellow from Orange County come up and put it on, have the boys there, Phil and your father, watching them put the motor on. Then we'll take the old motor, have it rewound down to Gallagher's, so this way we could save all that money and then have a spare.
But that's not doing the job. That's not adding another turbine pump.
No, but we have a spare,
We have-
God forbid,
okay.
if something,
Okay, Rick. I'm going to say, okay, we can talk to the engineer that we have and ask if that's acceptable, if this thing is compatible with the turbine that's in there. That's what.
sure it is.
Well, we'll find out. We can look into it and see if that's something that the committee wants to do. But I thought the whole purpose of this was to have a third pump so that you could take the full turbine pump out at times to have the whole thing reworked,
Yes,
instead of just the motor.
absolutely.
And,
but
and
this
to
way-
remind you that the gentleman that was there said he's very familiar with these motors and they're working proper.
Well,
The
this
grinding
way-
sounded natural.
This way, if we have a problem, I have the spare pump there, and it will cost the taxpayers, that.
Where are you gonna get, again, you still have to have that capital reserve in order to buy even that motor. You say it's $7,000 for the motor.
Yeah,
But I don't think that's accomplishing the task that you set out.
okay.
We could certainly, good, we could pass that along to the engineer and look into it. With that, I'd just like to introduce John, our county legislator is here. And thank you for coming, John, at our behest. Again, anything you can enlighten us on county issues, again, our big concerns were RRA. I was glad to see that RRA changed their plan for recyclables and the cost of recyclables. It's total amount of solid waste, or what the cost translates as far as solid waste with our cost of storage. But we have the issues of, safety net will be going away. They'll be finishing up this year. Election costs, though, I'd like to ask you again. I have not reduced the third out of our election cost. I know that you've championed this for 2 years trying to get this done to no avail. And now it appears that the county executive has put this into his budget over a 3-year plan of a takeover. And how secure do you think the legislature is in adopting that?
Did you just read my speech?
No.
Did I drop it on the floor somewhere?
I'll let you take the microphone. Thank you for coming here tonight. I appreciate
Do you want my fellow American speech or just?
it. Let's do it.
Okay. Well, you know, Bob, as you just said, and to the board members, the safety net was a big deal. It's huge. You know, the communities that I represent, certainly in their budget had a far smaller allocation over the years than some of the other communities where people who had problems and those that were slipping through would go for their services and their housing. But it was coming this way, and I think you know that. And that's a big deal. The election costs, you know, it's a third, and a third, and if everything goes right by the next presidential year, which is usually 3 elections in a year, it'll be off your books. You know, both of them, in my mind, were no-brainers, but you have to convince a lot of other folks. Certainly Kevin Cato was a huge help in that because he recognized that there are county charges. The safety net's a county charge, and election costs are a county operation, therefore a county charge, and those of us that beat our chests all the time about unfunded mandates can't be inconsistent in life. So we now have the responsibility for those, and it's the right thing. When you talk about the RRA, you know, the county walked away from its obligations, or they tried to, a couple of years ago through flow control and attempting to eliminate the net service fee. The net service fee was designed to give stability and strength to the organization. Knowing that there were these things happening, I might just point out that the safety net costs and the insurance and the election costs can help mitigate some of the increase in costs from the RA, because they now have to operate as you do. They have to balance their budget. Leon Smith is a very good friend, and he's a bright manager. He knows what's going on, and you know, he did take us a couple of steps sideways in terms of the recycling and in terms of some of the charges, and the net service fee hasn't gone away. It's been like hidden. It's a little out of sight. But there is room that I'm going to be speaking with the executive. I'm going to be speaking with Mike in the next couple of days about some thoughts I have to work with the recycling component, which is what we all want. The more you recycle, the less waste, the less transportation costs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're working on that. But there was some progress made just since, you know, I saw you at the last meeting, you know, and guys are throwing around figures like only a $50,000 reserve, which just wasn't accurate. You know, an agency like that would be, I mean, the controller would practically take it over if they operated with that sort of a reserve. But they have to build it back up. It is $750,000, which they need because this is it's an unstable business. But I think they're doing actually quite a good job. What are some of the other things? I know I've worked with your commander over here. Anybody ever got a white hat as a commander in my head? Is that Ricky back there? I should have known that. Oh, God.
It's an honor.
Listen, I gotta go. I gotta get out of here. But we now have, through legislation, elevated the emergency medical component of the rescue squads and the ambulances to a county-recognized concern. Matter of fact, I'm going to be meeting you later this week, aren't I? about putting some things, putting people on the committee. You know, when you get to be my age, you know damn well you're not too far from, you know, please, I've fallen and I can't get up, and we gotta make sure there's people around the county that can help us. And the rescue squads, they're so dedicated, and the fire people, but we're talking about them right now. I just can't imagine doing that and dedicating myself to probably more continuing education every year than lawyers, doctors, and Indian chiefs, and certainly politicians have to go through. So we're working to create a very special interest committee that is going to be concerned with a whole host of issues like that. And you know, Rick was a great help when we started thinking about this and talked about it in our speech. The other half of that component also they passed was our narcotics, Narcan committee, to recognize that this, in particular the heroin epidemic is a disaster. It crosses all sections of economic, social, and educational levels, and this whole thing started in a way when I found out that, not just me, a lot of folks, but that the rescue squad sometimes in January, to use that in particular when I got my other job here, might not have the cash to buy the antidote to save lives. Because they're on a, you know, they were on a budget and they didn't have it. And of course we have a great committee set up with the district attorney, our sheriff, Paul Van Blarkham, and others. And everybody agreed it's an epidemic. And those folks in law enforcement said, yeah, you know, we got to put the bad guys away, but we don't have to, we also have to save lives. And we want to be there. And so we're doing quite well with this, I believe. And once the committees are established, then they have to lobby for themselves and have their forums. But you know, I modeled a lot of my thinking around just what you folks have done up here in Shandaken, going back, what, 30 years now, I guess, since Gormley's went out of the rescue business. So I think we've done pretty well for the town governments in trying to relieve them of some of their responsibility that they really never should have had in the first place. And then we're going to keep moving on things like housing, which I am very concerned with, and jobs, which I am very concerned with, because we all know the school is imploding, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean there's no kids. It's not good. I mean, I have a granddaughter that graduated college and got some additional training or master's or whatever the hell you call it these days, and she can't get a job around here. She goes to Albany. Drives to Albany, drives home. She also probably owes enough money that she can't have a house up there and a job and make the payments every month. It's a real problem. But we got to take care of what we can take care of. So I'll answer whatever questions you might want, but might have of me, and then I'm going to scoot because I got a meeting in West Shokan about the budget. The budget, the executive did a pretty good job on it. You know, guys like us can always throw rocks, and that's silly. There's a 1% tax increase, or whatever it is. It's very minor. He's been able to keep expenses under control and do a pretty good job with the revenues. So, you know, anything else you want to talk to me about, Bob? Anybody?
Any other board members have any questions?
I got a question.
And
Rick's always got a question.
you got back here?
Rick, is
No,
this legit?
Yes, I just say it's an honor having you here.
An honor, no less. An honor, no less. Imagine
No,
that.
come up here to Shandaken, you know, we'd like.
And I don't need to see an eye dog to find my way
We'd
here,
like
by
to
the
see you
way.
here more often.
Thanks.
Hey, John, I want to thank you for your candor. I want to thank you for everything you've done. I know you've been supportive of everything the town board has sent your way.
Okay, well, if you need
Appreciate
anything,
that.
anybody, you know, I know Ralphie mentioned something to me, but the ambulance has to do with insurance and ambulance and costs and revenue or reimbursement to the towns and things like that. So just let me know what's going on. I don't I was busy, didn't have a chance to talk. Whatever it might be, you can ask him. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Jeff.
Hey, Tommy.
Yes, Carol.
I actually have a question about the ambulance costs and reimbursements, because it is one of our bigger items. It looks like we have about $330,000 plus in expenses, and if I was reading it right, somewhere there's $135,000 in income from ambulance fees. That's about $200,000 shortfall. And I'm just wondering how that compares with a year ago, 10 years ago. We made some changes, you know, we have excellent service, but we have that cost. And how does that cost compare with other comparable towns in the county or around the region? So,
I can tell you again, at our preliminary meeting last month, when we presented the budget, I went in detail about the issues with the revenues we had. We met with the billing company and wanted to know why there was such a reduction in what we were seeing in the revenues from one set, $35,000 reduction. What came out is that a number of years ago, we were getting 4 or 5% of the billable patients were uninsured. We also had a collection agent joined with that billing company, who then followed through and maybe got a 5% return of the 4 or 5% that we billed out. Now what has occurred, whether it be differences in healthcare plans or whatever it may be, there is now a much larger contingent of uninsured patients that are being delivered by our ambulance. 20%. Of the 20%, since Comstar, the new billing company, since they started, they have received $0 from any uninsured patients. So we had a thing on a checklist that was basically, you know, if you wanted to report the people after they did some follow through on it and couldn't get any response, you report the people to Experian or one of the credit bureaus. But that only affects them if they go for a major purchase. And I can tell you, having worked in a car dealership, sometimes a car dealership will look the other way, even if there's a medical bill on your credit report. So there's nothing really to force the people to pay this. So a 20% reduction in the revenues right there, just on uninsured patients. That's really what it comes down to. We're getting no return. So they've now gotten us in touch with a collection agent who does a similar business as we did from the previous one, and we will be signing on with them probably at the December meeting to move forward from here.
well, that sounds like a good adjustment, and I wonder if some of those uninsured patients would qualify for Medicaid, and so we could get some kind of payment through Medicaid or Medicare if they're older.
But you can't back bill them. They'd have to be under that coverage when they're transported. That's the problem.
They're uninsured.
I
Well,
mean,
maybe
it's
we
huge.
need to look at where those patients are coming from and do something proactive. If they're residents, then they should be on those coverages. Even if they're people coming to this region, you know, from other places.
Again, you're gonna get into HIPAA laws, and yeah, it's a mixture. It's from out of the area, it's Bel Air, it's.
I'm not talking about coercing anybody, I'm talking about making things available so that people who are predictably going to have, you know, especially in the older populations, predictably going to have some needs that we know that they're set up so that if they have those needs, and it might be some outreach from social service, I guess that's the town supervisor at this point, but outreach from someone in the town or some kind of programs to make sure that people who are qualified are signed up for this coverage. And I mean, 20% is just a huge amount, and I mean, it's a jump from our prior, so something has changed, and I think we need to look into it. I mean, this is one of the largest single areas of expense that may be amenable to change.
As, again, I can speak to as far as costs, and I'm sure Rich can elaborate upon this too. You go look at them, Tim. Go look at what they're spending on it. I mean, I can tell you, Woodstock is near what, 800 and something thousand?
Their budget is actually well over $1 million.
Per capita, I mean, because they're a bigger place, so per capita, how do we compare?
Yeah. So it's tough to actually make a comparison between Woodstock and Town of Shandaken ambulance. The Town of Shandaken ambulance is very unique in that it is a municipally operated ambulance service.
Right.
And there's a plethora of different ways that an ambulance service can be ran. We chose to run it as a municipal ambulance service. most emergency medical service providers or districts or operators run at a loss. That because of the fact that insurance coverage is variable if you're doing it for profit. Woodstock does not have revenue from the emergency calls that they run because they're a fire district. There's legislation that's been put out there at the state level to allow fire districts to bill. That has not gone through yet. So if you fall down on Tinker Street, you will not receive a bill. If you fall down on Main Street, Phoenicia, you will. The way that we really quantify the savings to the taxpayer in the town of Shandaken is in our unit hour cost and the level of service that we provide to the town. We provide, at the very least, one ALS ambulance, 24 hours, 7 days a week. Now, ALS, for those of you that don't know, is an advanced life support ambulance, paramedic level ambulance. What a paramedic can do versus a basic life support provider or an EMT is many advanced procedures. And I know you're familiar coming from a medical field, but for those of you that may not know, it's essentially the scope of practice that is a little bit less than a physician's assistant or a PA. So we carry cardiac medication, actually a plethora of medications. We can do direct laryngoscopy, and I can go on and on. But the bottom line is, it's an advanced level of provider that is going to scenes in the town of Shandaken, mind you, under at an average of 50%, under 9 minutes and 59 seconds. In a town that is 119.8 square miles, that is a feat all of its own. So in the ambulance business, we base our numbers on a unit hour number. So in commercial ambulance services or for-profit ambulance services, they base their number on unit hours. A unit hour breaks down to the employees, the vehicles, the durable medical equipment, the employee coverage, so on and so forth. That and diesel costs, so that cost on average in New York State is about $80. So to run one advanced life support ambulance, which is the bare minimum that town of Shandaken runs, $80 times as many hours as there are in the year is $698,880 per one ALS ambulance. Now, mind you, we run 2 during the weekends when we have Bel Air active, and for special events, and we have a disaster, so on and so forth. So, less our anticipated revenue. So it's $135,000 this year. Less our anticipated revenue, the actual amount to be raised by taxes, if you want to look at it that way, is $195,681 and change. I'm not really that good at math. So essentially, that equates to $22.40 per unit hour for an ALS ambulance to provide 24 hours, 7-day-a-week coverage in the town of Shandaken, which I assure you, if you were to contact any ambulance service in Ulster County and beyond, you would find is a bargain. Because we have had, since even prior administrations of the ambulance, have had that do more with less mentality.